Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Srirang Kamat. I'm the product manager for Dremio. Some ground rules. You'll be able to ask a lot of questions, but it'll be at the end of the session. So this next presentation is from Casey Cast, who is my colleague at Vertica. At Dremio. And this is about Semantic Layer and the future of self-service analytics. So these are best practices on how to define and deploy. And over to you, Casey.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. So thank you for the time today. I just want to open with that. It's been truly amazing to be around all of you, learn so much about what you're doing, talk to each one of you. And so I want to take just a second before we get into the content for people to look left or to look right and introduce yourself to somebody you don't know. This is the most valuable thing out of these conferences. You can always go watch these videos online. For the people remotely, you can go do that. But just take a second, introduce yourself, and just have a little hello and tell somebody about what you do. Here we got some people doing it. OK. All right, so thanks for taking that moment. I think those connections are invaluable. It's what makes conferences the value and the beautiful thing that they are. It's everyone gets to come together and share some thoughts. So we're going to talk about semantic layers today, and we're going to share some thoughts about what is a semantic layer and why are they important. So I have three main questions I want each one of you to be able to answer when you walk away from this. Why do I need a semantic layer? What are the objectives of a semantic layer? And how do I build and deploy one? Pretty simple. But semantic layers are kind of an interesting thing because they've been around for a while. You know, they're around in the BI layer in the 90s, early 2000s. They kind of went out of fashion. Now they've come back into fashion. But they are truly timeless. Because we're not talking about a technology. While the term about what this is may change, it is truly a timeless thing of a question about how do we connect with our data. And that is the key thing of a semantic layer. So to get to this, we're going to talk about some definitions because semantics are all about definitions. So if you look at the definition of semantic, it's relating to meaning of logic or language. And that's really interesting, logic or language. I choose to interpret this as business logic, right? Not just formal logic, which some people go down that path. So it's the intersection of language, of your business, and your business logic. So that's what semantic means, right? So let's keep that in the back of our brain as we go through this. We're going to go through definitions because it's logic and language. But semantic layers really start with questions. The previous gentleman from AWS was saying, I have young kids and I hear why 20 million times a day. I also have young kids and I also hear why 20 million times a day. And so this is really an interesting thing, but you also hear it in business quite often. Who has ever been in a meeting where you're sitting there and somebody says, how many customers do we have? And you start with such a simple question. How many customers do I have? And you start to think about it, and you start to think a little bit more. And somebody raises their hand and says, oh, what's a customer? The UX folks are going to say, you know what? Actually, users are customers, right? Like, I care about active users. I care about the usability of my product. Therefore, users are customers. And then somebody from support would say, no, 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 no. Accounts are customers. We need to keep the account happy. Users are the ones who are breaking stuff, and we need to keep the account happy. So we're going to look at this at an account level. That is a customer to me. And then you talk to somebody in sales, and they say, no, no, no. Organizations are the customer. We sell to an organization, and that is the customer to me. So with one word, customer, which you heard about 10 times in the keynote this morning, I'm sure we heard it sprinkled through all the talks, we're already running into the challenge of semantics. What does a customer mean, right? And it means something different to each one of these groups. And the power of a semantic layer is it helps strictly define that in logic so that your data can be interpreted by these groups in a meaningful way. And once you do that, once you truly define per persona or per group what is a customer, you can start to dive into even more interesting conversations about data. Right? Users, what is a user? You can get down into that detail. What is a user, right? Is it a login? Is it an individual? Is it a user in a permissions perspective? What is a user? You can start to define and have nuanced conversations that drive material business value. You then start to ask questions about your users, like monthly active user, weekly active user. You have to define user before And then you have to define activity before you can even start to have this conversation. What is an account? Do all accounts use products? Is another just kind of classic case where before you have to define these key concepts to make this work. And so in a span of one question, we've fanned this out to many questions and many avenues of investigation over our data without even talking about technology. This is a human and language-centric problem. So if you look at this, everything in quote, we've introduced concepts. So we started with users, or we started with customer. We then broke out to users. We then broke out into activity of users, accounts, organizations, products. You can see how this continues to happen over time. And what you do not want as an organization is everybody to decide they're going to make up their own definitions for each one of these. Good luck trying to have a meaningful conversation. Right? So semantic layers is all about that language and that concept and codifying it in logic and data. OK. So let's go to semantic layer. We talked about language, the importance of language. Now let's talk about semantic layer. So according to Wikipedia, I would say the OG ChatGPT. Here's the definition. So semantic layer is a noun. It's a business representation of corporate data that helps users access autonomously using common business terms. Pretty straightforward. I actually thought this was great. I looked at a bunch of other products as well as Dremio's documentation and blogs. Everyone kind of plays around this key idea. So it seems to be genuinely accepted. And the second sentence is also very interesting. The semantic layer maps complex data into familiar business terms, such as product, customer, revenue. I built the first slides before this, so I felt very validated. So we're on the right track here as far as we go. Or revenue to offer a unified, consolidated view of data across the organization. Pretty powerful, pretty succinct definition. I was pretty impressed here. So with this, I see three key objectives out of this statement. You help users access data autonomously. Cinder calls this self-service data access, but autonomous data access is another way to describe that. Maps complex data into familiar business terms. So end users don't need to be concerned of physically how that data is laid out. I'm a data geek. I love how the data is laid out. I understand end users and other folks don't care that much. And so being able to have that abstraction layer is extremely important. And then finally, having a unified, consolidated view of data across the organization provides a lot of additional benefits. So I'm going to claim that these three are the objectives of a semantic layer. So we take those and we start to break them down. So let's start at the left, which is self-service data access. And this is really all about enabling others to go solve their own problems. And like we said, it really starts with the definition of terms and the providing of the correct access. But it's not just about for BI queries. Like when we start to think about this, and we think about those personas we talked about, the product manager looking at the user experience, sales, support, they're all talking about this in the same way. And just like that, we also have different use cases. BI and ML are starting to play more and more together. We had a whole session about generative AI using the same data. So it's not just bespoke semantic layers for certain workloads anymore. It's how do we think of applicability of this data across multiple workloads. So with that, the data needs to be self-describing. I'm going to make a pretty strong claim. By having self-describing data, you help future users go and interact with that data. You're helping them solve their own problems. You're teaching them to fish. We hear this constantly from central IT teams saying, I just cannot keep up with my business users. So there's one of me, there's 10 of them, there's 20 of them, 100 of them. I can't keep up. So it's all about teaching people to fish and providing them the fundamentals to go fish themselves. And then finally, not everyone can see all the data. This is super key. So as we talk about democratizing data and opening everything up, you have to do it in a very safe way, right? You have to protect the PII, HBI within your data. And this is all part of the semantic layer, is putting the right controls in place. So that's self-service data access. Abstraction over complexity. So I was talking with somebody earlier today, and they're saying, hey, I have this data coming in. My analysts just don't get it. They just don't want to go deal with that. And I was like, well, did you talk about building a semantic layer? And they're like, what is that? And I told them to come here. So the whole thing, though, is how do we up-level the discussion for our end users and think outside in from a data space? And it's all about abstracting over the complexity of table formats and file formats and everything else and say, here's a table. Here's the views that you want to go use. Here's the data product you want to go consume. And here's the language to go do it in. So semantic layers over their history have tried to introduce a ton of new languages, if you kind of look through the history of semantic layers. And they're all trying to tackle this modeling and try to get to this source of truth of, let's do this most elegant way that we could possibly do this. I'm going to say that the best way to go implement a semantic model is with SQL. Because with SQL, almost anyone can go read that code with minimal training and understand kind of what it's doing if you lay it out in a logical way. Now, can they write recursive CTEs with all the latest windowing function? Maybe not. But they can at least understand, hey, this came from this table or this view, and we get to understand the data there pretty well. So it is a nice middle ground or a language construct that that most folks and most analysts can go use. And then these last two are really tied together. I don't know if anybody's run into this before, but queries have to return correct results, and they have to be performant. Trying to convince somebody, let's take an example. If you were running a query to generate your tax, what you owe the IRS for taxes, and you said, hey, sorry, my results were incorrect because the data was eventually consistent, I don't think the IRS is going to care that much that you misstated your numbers, right? So consistency, getting the correct results every single time is critically important to build trust for your end users. And they really need to have that trust in the system. And with that, on the other side, is the system needs to be performant out of the box. Customers or end users don't care about the complexity of indexes or table health or anything like that. They just want the system to run effectively. So I really add this as kind of removing that complexity from the end user. Let's abstract over it, make it something that people can generally use. And then finally, on the far right, unified and consolidated view of the data. Having a single source of truth for a particular data set is extremely powerful for a couple of reasons. One, you're not going to duplicate data across your enterprise. I know that's the easiest thing to do in a lot of situations, but it causes a governance nightmare. You now have maybe PIA or HBI littered across the enterprise as everybody takes copies of data and moves data around. GDPR request comes in that you need to delete this. What are you going to have to go do? You're going to have to do a fire drill to figure out where those data assets have run off to. And so having a single location and a single version of that data simplifies that. It makes those fire drills extremely easy because you know exactly where your data is and you know exactly the policies you have in place. So that's on the governance side. It also helps keep definitions in one place, right? You have a consistent set of metrics or views that everyone is using. So you don't have these communication problems about, oh, I meant customer was this, and you meant customer was that, and now we're all confused. You've defined that in one place, and you have agreement of what these definitions are. And then finally, in the inevitability that you need to restate something, you only have to restate it once, and change management is much easier. So those, in my opinion, are the three objectives of a semantic layer. Right? Self-service data access, abstract over complexity, and a unified consolidated view of your data. And it just so happens this pretty much aligns to Dremio's. So if you look at this slide, this is how we see the world here at Dremio, where physical data lives in your storage, right? It is separate. It lives down on your physical data layer. You then build logical data models. You call these data models or data products. Essentially a set of views and reflections on top of that data where you can build that business logic in order to provide a performant, consistent experience for your consumers. And then on top of that, if you need to, you can build metrics or specific aggregations. You can use things like reflections to get that performance. But the beautiful thing is from an end user perspective, all of that is transparent. They don't have to worry about, am I hitting a reflection or I'm not, right? It just works, and it just works, which is amazing. Okay, so some best practices that we've seen and so that we've heard. On the far left, this is purely process, right? It's not, a lot of this isn't technical. It's just engage the business, right? If you're trying to enable self-service, engaging the business early and often to get their feedback, to get their input, to get them to help you write the code and define things is critical to buy-in and critical to success of the project. In a previous life, I did a lot of implementations. We always made sure the business had a seat at that table when we were talking technical because we learned so much from what they cared about, what was their priority, what did they need to do to be successful. And at the end of the day, the success of a semantic layer is not the success of the technology. It's the success of the end user. They need to be able to do their day jobs faster, better, cheaper on your system, or they won't adopt it. Right? So that's super, super important. And second, getting them to help define the data wikis, and get them to participate will help their vernacular permeate through the technology, and that's critically important as well, right? It's all about how language overlays the data here, and getting the vernacular of their industry and of their space embedded is the way to success. Because you don't want me to go define any sort of trading information, because I'm terrible with money. So like, that's just a very bad idea. But somebody who does this day in and day out and who can describe it more effectively to their peers and getting that embedded in the product is extremely important. So with that engagement and with that enablement, as a central team building and maintaining a semantic layer, you want to encourage engagement while protect quality. And this is kind of the tension that you're going to have in the semantic layer. By having people experiment, having people run queries, having people self-service changes, who's going to be responsible for the quality of the output at the end of the day? It's likely the centralized team that runs and manages this system. So while you encourage engagement, constantly be vigilant for the quality of the system. And we're going to talk about that in the demo a little bit, about how we propose that you do that. But it's just something to keep in mind. It's not just everything for free. You know, a little bit of healthy tension is a good thing in some of these systems. And the final one, I'm not going to talk about it in the demo because we've had a ton of talks on security, but making sure that security is first and foremost in your design. There's nothing worse than having an HBI or a PII leak through an entire centralized semantic layer that completely kind of defeats the purpose of centralizing your data. So centralize it, but keep this in mind from the beginning. Object levels, permissions, RBAC, data masking, all of those are tools at your disposal. There's a great lake formation talk earlier about other tools at your disposal. We highly encourage that you build those into the process early so that you can protect your customer and your consumers. All right, so we're going to do a quick, fun demo. I know it's been a long day of content. And so we're going to go into something fun. And I was trying to think about, like, I'm going to New York. What do I want to demo? And so we're going to say that each one of you runs a pizza chain. You have 100 stores, and you want to be data-driven. When you had a single store, you knew the business. You were there for the lunch rush. You were there for dinner. You knew what pizzas people cared about. But now that you've expanded, you don't. You've lost touch. You need data to help ground you in your decisions. So the first goal is to create a semantic layer so that you can do this repetitively, right? So we can pull data in. You can understand your business at scale. Great. The ultimate goal is you have a deep-seated vendetta against Hawaiian pizza, and you really want to cut it from your menu, but you can't do it without justification, right? So let's dive into the data and figure out if we can finally cut that Hawaiian pizza from the menu. All right, so our data, I don't know if folks can see it in the back. It's all generated, so like don't scrape any of this because it doesn't mean anything. But it's a relatively gnarly piece of JSON. Like, I didn't want to do something easy for a demo. That would be too easy for myself and too easy for all of you, because I know how complicated your data is. Because every customer I talk to says, my data is really complicated. Right, so I picked a reasonably gnarly piece of JSON. We have orders, which is a list. You have a couple elements within orders. Then you go into another list of arrays, and that is the order details. So it's not just a simple, straightforward little demo. OK, so I have this recorded. So I'm going to talk through the recording. But hopefully, by the end of this, you can kind of see of the building blocks that we've built at Dremio, how you would go do this at scale. Right? So this is made up in simple, but we're going to go through and look at some of the key pieces. All right, so this is a Dremio console. And the first step that I'm going to do in the SQL runner is you see create branch cars dev in cars. So cars is my metadata store. cars dev is a branch. And so why am I creating a branch? It's kind of weird to do in a SQL system. And what I want to do is, remember, if we think about protecting quality as an objective, I'm creating a branch so I can mess around and make mistakes without impacting my reports, without impacting my end users. I can do this in an isolated fashion. This is huge. Like, I don't think this idea gets enough credit, right? This is an amazing thing. So I then do select star from pizza storage, pizza demo subsurface, pizza orders.json, which is the raw JSON sitting on S3, right? So Dremio can do this today, right? We can go query these. We can go inspect the data. And you can see it looks pretty gnarly, right? So we flattened it the first layer automatically, so we see orders. But if I gave that to an analyst and said, go have fun, they're going to be a little upset, right? They're not going to be the happiest people in the world. So the first thing I do after I inspect it is I load this JSON data into an iceberg table. So I can get this internally, and I do some flattening along the way, right? I pull out those key elements that we talked about: store ID, order time, credit card, if we're thinking about PII or HBI, something that we would want to mask, that's in there as well. Address, order, and order details. And order details is that list of pizzas that people bought, right? So I do a first layer of flattening just to get it into Iceberg and get it manageable. And I go ahead and just run that. You notice I'm doing all of this in that branch, not impacting main. Nobody can see that I'm doing this, which is wonderful for me as a data engineer because I'm not impacting end users. I then, within this, I pulled out order details as a column in raw. But as we look at it here, we see it's a list of elements, right? You have item ID, 1 through N. How many pizzas did you buy? Type. Well, what type of pizza? Pepperoni, Hawaiian, my favorite, barbecue chicken, cheese, which is acceptable. And then you get the size: medium, small, extra large, right? But it's a list, and it's hard to interact over that, right? We're trying to figure out if we can cut Hawaiian pizza. That is the goal. And so we need to rip that out as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a semantic layer here with a set of views. A view over the orders. So we have just the orders lined up, so we could answer questions of how many orders did I have, from how many, from where, et cetera. And we have order details, right, where we dive into exactly what type of pizza and how many of them have been bought, right? So just like that, we loaded raw data. We've created views, and I think this is over 10,000 records. This is snappy. It's not a huge engine that we're demoing on. So, but you can see how we're building up, and we're lessening the complexity from a very gnarly JSON to 2 views, effectively, right? Nobody needs to go see raw. And the last thing, talking about customers, we've made a definitive discussion here, right? We have pizza customers, which is the distinct customer and address. And that is what we're defining. And now that is embedded in our system, right? That implicit definition is there. So finally, we get to our query of how many pizzas are sold. And this is a relatively simple SQL statement. Nobody had to go struggle through JSON and figure out how to do this. It's now select star, or select count star as pizza sold by group by type, right? And unfortunately, Hawaiian pizza is our best seller, which is tragic. And barbecue chicken is our worst seller, which is even more tragic. As a native Memphian, the only good thing about pizza is barbecue sauce on top of it. So this is very disheartening for me. But the valuable thing is we're being data-driven. I didn't just cut Hawaiian pizza because I don't like it. And I didn't just promote barbecue chicken because I do like it. I can now make a data-driven decision. And I can do this consistently over time, which is hugely valuable. So now I could bury these results forever by deleting this branch and let no one ever know that Hawaiian pizza won. But I'm a good data citizen. I'm going to merge my branch back into main so everybody can see these results. I can eat my shoe, so to speak, and kind of live with the consequences. So I go ahead and merge that. And now in main on the left nav, you can see that I atomically populated all of this work I just did in one go. There's no, hey, we found this table, and it's in a weird state compared to these other ones. All of those got populated at the same time. So that is, in and of itself, just an amazing thing. I dropped my branch to clean everything up. And now, as I was discussing earlier, we want to self-describe this, right? We want this to be self-describing, so anybody who comes along can say, what is this? So we use our generated wiki, which automatically populates a wiki describing exactly what this data set does, as well as the columns, and an example row. So people have a feeling about what this data set could be. I can also edit it if I wanted to. But that tied together is a workflow for creating a semantic layer, right? We started with the raw data. We created a branch. We loaded it. We built views on top of it. We answered our business question, and then we published it to other users and documented our case. And that is hugely valuable for an enterprise. So this is a simplified case. We solved one problem about pizza. But you could imagine how this would go across the enterprise and how those building blocks can be expanded and scaled out to the complexity of your workload. So in conclusion, all right, we started with why, what, how. Why do I need a semantic layer? Well, it really helps you bridge the gap from the complexity of your underlying data, the bits and bytes, the files, all that technology that we know and love, but that does not help you with business outcomes. Semantic Layers bridges that gap and provides a familiar interface for end users to go interact with that data. What are the objectives of a semantic layer? Well, we're really aiming for self-service data access. We want end users to participate, to be part of the definition of those views, to be interacting and exploring with the data, because they can start to ask more questions. And the more questions they ask, the more you all know about what your business is doing and the more impact that you can make. It abstracts over complexity. Hit that nail on the head a couple times, but no one really wants to go dive into the nitty-gritty details. They just want to solve their question and move on with their day and go on to the next question and the next question. And finally, it provides a unified, consolidated view over the data across the enterprise. How do you build one? Well, involve the business as much as you can. I mean, they are your customers. As a product manager, I obsess over what these customers are doing, my customers are doing, how they're using it. I think that same mindset is extremely valuable when we think about a semantic layer as a product that you're providing to your business. So just obsess over how they're using it. They usually have some hidden insights in there when stuff starts to break and they have some questions. Encourage engagement, but protect that quality. And that's about protecting yourself and your time, as well as protecting the user from misusing the data or getting access to data that they don't have. Which leads into the final part. Secure your valuable assets. Just make sure that you don't have any data leaking out. HBI, PI, there's a ton of tools to go do that. I didn't include them in the demo just for the sake of time, but it is something that you should keep top of mind as we move forward. And so with that, I would like to say a very genuine thank you to all of you. I know it's been a very long day, and you guys are awesome. My name is Casey Kars. If you have any feedback or questions that you don't want to ask in the next couple minutes, shoot me an email. It's a pretty complicated email, casey.kars@dremio.com. And with that, thank you.